You're listening to the Forest School podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
And a massive thanks to our current patrons, Simon Kenny, Joe H, Brona Steed, Jude Vincent and Chrissy McEvoy. Thank you so much, guys. It really does mean a lot.
Next week.
Only one.
So you're not doing it yet?
Just 3 days, that's all. 3 days.
Yeah.
But I remember, and we haven't done it for such a long time either, that it's like, just...
The need is great.
Yeah. I think people underestimate how much, especially if you go from doing like regular group stuff, you forget how much input is needed to like socially glue a group together, or to like, you sort of go, oh yeah, I do a bit of mediating in my sessions. You're like, no, session 1, you do lots of mediating and lots of like, okay, and this is what we are as a community, and this is, who everybody is. It's taxing. It's definitely taxing.
Yeah. And you don't have all the relationships with them, and you don't have the relationships with the families, and it's like they just land. Mm-hmm. and you have to work it out. It has been really exhausting, but it's really important, and I feel that most people are pretty desperate. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad we're doing it, but it's a bit full on.
Yeah. Where were you today?
So we've been in school grounds. We've not used the woodland at all, actually, because we've tried to go closer to where the communities are, where we know they have high numbers of free school meal kids, basically. Mm-hmm. So they can just walk to it. So we're at Berricombe School in Bodmin. It's our second week there, and then we've got to move somewhere else, but we're still in Bodmin. Yeah. In a park.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's like really hard, because when you're in the woods, like the woods does all the work for you. And then when you're just in a big open space, you have to take everything.
Mm. And then there's always that thing, isn't it, of like, what do you take and how much before you've become just a playground?
Yeah, we're definitely a playground. We're just a playground.
Yeah.
Like I kind of don't care, because we are taking as much stuff as we can that we would have in the woods to not the woods. And then anything they want to play with is okay with me, because that's what they need. And so I just can't be kind of nature snobby about it.
No.
Oh yeah.
No.
Yeah. Do you think so? I realized today when I was thinking about chatting with you, Nick, last time we chatted was like right bang on, maybe 2 weeks after the first lockdown happened here. Yeah. And we were talking about, resources and what was going to happen. And I was wondering about reflecting on, we've basically had, this will be the second summer with stuff still being a bit wobbly. And I think the first time there was this massive, because we had the first lockdown in April. So by the time you got to summer, people were so concerned about like play needs, and people need to get, and the kids need to socialize. And I don't know about where the sort of conversations you're having, but I feel like I've heard less of that this summer. Like it's completely dropped off. Yeah. At least compared to where it was last year, where people were like socialize. And now I feel like I'm hearing less of that, but I don't think the need has necessarily gone.
Oh, I think people are definitely a bit tired of hearing that COVID has had an impact. But actually it's had a massive impact, and that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're working with. And what's really interesting is that I think there's layers of impact, and it kind of filters down to the child. And so that the parents need them to be somewhere, that their school experience has been completely difficult and different, and then they haven't had all of that socializing, like you're saying, so they've maybe been in bubbles where they're restricted with who they can play with. And I think the need is immense. I'm a bit overwhelmed by it, if I'm honest. And because most of the people that are with us at the moment aren't necessarily children or families that we've worked with before, I'm just, the impact is enormous. And I agree. I think that we're not talking about it as much in terms of, you know, what everybody needs, but the need is there. It's massive.
Yeah.
You guys must feel that, you know.
We know, we can see that in our waiting lists and the families that are, you know, because we have made the decision to keep the group small and consistent, like for our home ed group, for example, and the holiday club. You know, this is the first time we did holiday club for 3 days running with the same group of children. We were like, that's what they need. They need a sense of community where it's the same kids. It's not just like in and out. And we thought, well, maybe people won't book up because it is a hefty wedge of money, and we tried to make it, you know, trying to make it accessible for people, and how can we pitch like different prices and stuff. And then and it booked out like in a day. And I'm like, whoa,
okay.
You know, and there's such a handful of places, and there's a waiting list for that. And the people that are on the waiting list for the home ed, you know, I meet them around and they go, tell me how far I am on the list. And it's like, I'm really sorry. Like, no one's like moving on because, you know, as you're saying, they do need that. So all the home ed kids, all of their groups have been stopped, you know, during COVID. Things aren't, you know, there's a couple of things that have restarted, but not really very much. It's only people like us who've got the kind of childcare status that are allowed to open, have been allowed to open. And so these home ed kids have been like completely isolated for ages. And
there seem to be more home ed kids, don't you think?
Oh my God, so many more.
I think lots of people just took the opportunity once, or not took the opportunity, maybe once they get off, I think of it as like getting off the treadmill, you know, once you're out of the school run and the whatever. And not only do you have more time to think, but then people also had to spend more time with their own children or see their own children in a different way and have conversations. And, you know, it's that chance to reflect rather than just, okay, we don't have time, we just got to get the lunch boxes ready for tomorrow, okay, we've got to get PE kit washed, and all those things that like they just take up so much mental space and so much time. It's only when you get a break that you see people go, I don't know. And also lots of people reflecting on whether, because there have been some changes in mainstream schooling, whether they're going, you know, my kids were all right before, but what it looks like they're going to be going back to is just maybe the straw that's going to break the camel's back, or the, you know, it's just not going to be right for them anymore. We
have lots of hand washers. Have you noticed that? Kids that have come back from school and they've got a little bit of a hand washing problem, which has been quite interesting, because obviously there've been you know, all those new routines, and then, to be fair, in the woods we're usually quite grubby. We're a bit grotty, and so it's been really interesting, you know, working with kids who have come back from school and then they've got this sort of hand washing obsession from any tiny little thing. You know, so not just sort of general good hygiene considering we're in a pandemic, but, you know, almost problem level hand washing.
Have you got very mixed age groups?
I mean, we're consciously mixed age groups, actually, because I just really like it. I think it works really nicely, and it works nicely in both directions. So I think the obvious thing that people think is that the older ones will care for the younger ones, but actually it's not as simple as that, because the younger ones actually help and inject quite a lot of energy and fun into the older teens, and they're much more likely to carry on playing, I think, with younger ones around, encourage them to do that. So I just, that's my preference, really, where possible.
I think having younger children around strips away any element of trying to be cool, any kind of like self-consciousness, because you can always play it off as like, oh yeah, but I'm doing it because the little kids wanted to be Spider-Man, or like I'm doing it, you know,
I'm just helping them. And I love it when you see like you know, we've got 12-year-olds who will be doing like 12-year-old boy kind of trying to be a grown-up type play for quite a long time in quite an intense way, and then you can see them kind of go, oh, I really need to come play with a little kid now. And they kind of just like go and mellow and chill out doing some 6-year-old play. And it's so healthy for them. You know, you just see how kids are naturally like that. That's how they should be in their free time. But
I think they want to keep playing, don't they? But they don't, because they are self-conscious, and having that 6-year-old play, like you say, around them, that just gives them a perfect get out.
Oh, I'm
they've got all
30
the
and I struggle to pretend to be 30 all day.
Yeah.
Need a break.
Yeah.
Find out about CPD courses at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
So, Nick, we're here to talk about your the work that you're doing, which has been given. It's been given an award. It's been given a
So we just got and so just to be clear, when I say an award, it's like a funding award. And then I realised when I had put this on social media that some people were like, "Wow, you've got an award!" And I mean, it is amazing that we got it, and it is an acknowledgement of the work that we're doing, but it is funding, and it's really important funding for us because it's from Unlimited, and they are a charity who specifically funds social impacts, basically, and they also like to support people with lived experience. So often the social entrepreneurs who they will give awards to are also social entrepreneurs who have lived experience in a particular area that has significant social impact. And it was a really hard going application and interview, and we didn't think that we had got it, and so we're absolutely delighted. It's amazing. And I'm really grateful for you guys letting me talk about that, because that's actually part of our obligation, is also to let people know that we have that. But for me, it's also a perfect opportunity to just talk about the stuff that we do, and because we think that's pretty important.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So the funding that you've got, is that for the kind of work that you're doing right now, or is this for a new project that's going to be?
No, so it's not. It's quite unusual in that it's not specific. It's not for a specific project. They actually fund a person. Wow. So they funded me. And there aren't many funders who do that. So it is part of our CIC, and it is about our CIC work. But they actually award it to a person, which is also quite overwhelming in a way, and it feels like a massive responsibility. But basically that is still just channeled through the CIC work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a phenomenal level of integrity and trust to be
oh my
just
God,
you, that person, your
Yeah.
ideas and anything you do, we think is great and needs to happen more. That must be a big, like you say, lots of, we started by saying how tiring and taxing this work can be, but that must be a big boost to have an external,
Yeah, it's a massive acknowledgement, and it feels really precious, because we really believe in what we're doing, but it is exhausting, and I don't know, and sometimes it is that you're not following the path of the obvious financial path of profit, and so it just feels really amazing that they have seen us, that we're visible, and that they think what we're doing is good enough to give us a bit of a boost. So yeah, we're delighted.
So we kind of know you and your work, but listeners might not. So can you kind of paint a picture of what your CIC does and all the different kind of projects that you've been up to recently?
Yeah, so we're the Curious School of the Wild, and I've been working under that umbrella for quite a long time, but as a sole trader. And then in January, we became a CIC, and that was largely because we wanted the work to reach further. And just me on my own, there were limits to what I could do and what I could achieve. And we've already been, doing much of the same things that you guys do and that lots of outdoor providers would be doing. So we have home ed groups, and we go to schools and we deliver in schools and other settings. But something that we do that maybe not everybody does is that we also go out into communities. So a lot of our work will be in woodland, classic woodland, or on the beach. But we will also go right to where people live. And that sometimes means that we're in quite residential areas. We might be just on a patch of grass, in the middle of an estate or in a park, or like at the moment we're in a school field while there's nobody in school. And the idea of that is to try and make what we offer as accessible as possible. And it has its limits, like we were saying at the beginning, because you often have to take quite a lot of kit with you. And as we know, the woodland, the trees do a lot of work. And that's such an important and valuable part of what we do when we're in the woods. And then you can't take that with you. So we have to work out, how we can kind of take the essence of what we do to these sort of non-traditional outdoor learning spaces, if you like.
Yeah, there's been so much recently about the kind of social inequality of the outdoors, and very recently on Instagram, all the discussion about the intersectional motherhood post on Instagram about forest school being really exclusive and actually being kind of like an almost gatekeeper of the outside. And what's that about? Like, do you really have to be a trained forest school leader in order to kind of facilitate this kind of play and nature connection with young people? And what if you can't afford that? And I thought that was alongside the kind of ongoing discussion about social inequality and access to play in nature, I thought that was an extra layer of kind of interesting debate about forest school as a whole being, that gatekeeper thing and sort of access to the training. I thought was really, really interesting. And that's a study that we reviewed on one of the podcasts about nature connection being.
So I think Gemma was just basically taking on that idea that like the outdoors does need to be more accessible, and what things have you found work in terms of making it more accessible, and what things do you think that hopefully there's some things that any provider could kind of adopt and put those bits in?
I think that's a really good question, and it's really important, but there's definitely no kind of silver bullet, and I think it changes, and I think what is needed changes for everybody, but also locally, for your groups and for the families you work with. But there are actually some really, really standard things that we've just adopted as default practice, and we're quite well known for food, for example. But that's because we try to make our practice so that if someone is struggling financially for whatever reason, that they don't need to declare that that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the ways that you can sort of reduce stigma, so that a parent or a child doesn't have to, say, actually, we're really struggling at the moment, we don't have this, could you help with this? And so one of the most standard things we do is we have second breakfast at everything. And then in that way, you are not saying this breakfast is provided for these children. You're just saying anybody that wants breakfast can have it.
Yeah.
And if you've already had it, so what? You get second breakfast. And it's just a really simple way to make sure that you are not highlighting that some children have more needs than others, and that whatever you're providing is just for everybody. So that reduction of stigma is, would be top of my list, because even when we think that we're doing something really amazing and thoughtful or generous to help families or to help children, sometimes actually we're making their situation harder.
Yeah.
And that is not what any of us would want to do, because we obviously, we're desperate to do the right thing and we're desperate to support. And so it would just be tragic, if someone was being offered help and actually they just felt more isolated by that.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important also, you know, if you are asking people to literally sign up for stuff, that the way that you do that is not public, and so that you don't have to ask them anything, you know, in front of a queue of parents, or so that you just do your best actually to make what you provide equal and accessible for everyone, no matter who they are or what they have.
Yeah. That's definitely something. I think there's a something that I know we in our practice have tried to do, that thing of going, we really want to help people, and we want to meet these kind of needs, and so you get stuck in that place of you want to broadcast what you're doing to the right people and to the people that need that, but the more you make it known, the more it becomes, like you say, a stigmatizing. Yes. So like you say, trying to find those ways where you just go, this is on offer. Do you find you end up eating a lot of leftover second breakfasts, or is it always all gone?
It is usually always all gone, and everybody eats second breakfast. And then when you are providing something like that is, you know, to help people who might be, you know, not able to afford the food that they need, you also actually end up doing some really good things for other groups of kids as well, and for other families. So there are always kids who have just rushed out of the house and they've got a million other things on and they didn't get breakfast, or someone who was like maybe having a breakfast meltdown as they left, and so they didn't eat. And so actually by providing something for one group of children, you end up providing something that is really useful for lots of other groups as well.
Yeah, and that kind of carries over quite a lot, doesn't it, too? I know some of the work that you've been doing is with neurodivergent learners, and that's one of the things that we hear all the time from that sort of sphere of work and accommodation, is actually what is useful to those learners is useful to all. You know, there's no point in going, oh, this is the chill out hammock and it's only for these two children, because whatever. You go, no, actually everybody's going to need that, or you know, a visual timetable or things like that. You know, like you say, I think people are very used to maybe trying to reduce stigma there and not draw attention to the fact that, you know, this person needs that because of how their brain works, or this person needs that, but possibly in a socioeconomic way we're not so used to doing it.
I mean, I think I just would always try and provide what we provide for everybody, because it's the same kind of idea that we were talking about earlier with older participants who maybe need to play, and that you try to make an environment where that's okay. And so plays for everyone, hammocks for everyone, foods for everyone. You know, you're not saying this is just for this group of children. And to be honest, there are some things that I just think, well, if we bring that out in the woods, the elements of that stuff is going to be all over the woods. So I just won't get it out at all, because it's not reasonable to say, well, these people can use that, but you can't use that. So we just try to be as equitable as possible across everything. Food is like a massive thing, but I think going back to what Gemma was saying about the recent kind of discussions about Forest School, I think there's a huge children and families should have a certain kind of cultural capital that is nature based, and so, some providers might make something cheaper or free. I think that's only one barrier. And then there are other barriers that are actually much more about cultural capital. And then I sometimes get quite stressed and upset with posts on, you know, some of the groups that we might be in, some of the forums, when people are quite dismissive about people that can't identify certain things in nature, because I just think not everybody is raised that way. You know, not all families have that knowledge to pass on to their children. And actually, isn't that what we're here for? Isn't that part of what we do? And if families think that you need to be sort of outdoorsy, if you like, or naturey, then even if you make it free, then they're not going to turn up, are they? Because there are too many other things that they'll be anxious about, that they'll be nervous about. So I think there are all kinds of barriers that fit into that socioeconomic, you know, set of issues that you're talking about, Lewis. And it's not always just straight financial. I think there are lots of things.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do, hopefully a good sort of outdoor leader would be practiced in, is that idea of getting rid of your I've heard the phrase recently, like expert blindness subject, or a certain few subjects, that you forget the idea of what it is to be a novice, and so you kind of certain things, and I think that's one of the advantages that we have working with, like, you know, although the programs that we do are new 6-year-olds or new 12-year-olds, you're sort of constantly going back to that, like, oh, okay, what's step 1 in this process, not what's step 54. And sometimes that can be, because I know I'm guilty of this, I get so excited about like sharing knowledge, or sharing like, oh, and did you know this beetle does this, and this thing does this, and that tree is actually talking to this thing, and you can realize you've just bombarded someone in what wasn't meant to be, but actually can come off as like not bragging, but kind of like, it can make some people uncomfortable, can't it?
Yeah, or maybe that's not what they needed right then. Maybe they were really into like a social exchange in play that was incredibly meaningful for them. And I think that's how I found like my approach to the whole thing shift from like, it's about nature. Like I still 100% think it's about nature, but for some children, the freedom of just being able to choose what they do is like so completely life-changing and transformative that then like the fact that it happens to be in a woodland, it's almost like some of them don't even notice for quite a long time. It's just their freedom to be allowed to play and choose. And then the kind of nature stuff happens almost by accident, and you'll see the day they'll be like, oh, there's mushrooms, and you're like, yeah, there are, and that's completely fine. You know, I haven't gone into it with it like, and today we will learn about mushrooms because that's what's on my list of things to do today. You know, it's
it's almost like we could, I'm sure, sort of collaborative come up with some sort of it's like an improved hierarchy of needs for all these intersectionalities of different groups crossing over and going, actually, one, you know, it's food, it's low arousal spaces, it's, you know, we could probably come up with a hierarchy before you can get to the nature access stuff, before you can get to the problem solving and, you know, advanced woodworking or whatever it, you know, starting to do some whittling, is like, okay, we've got to meet all these other needs first to get there.
Yeah I mean, I think if you are a family with low income or living in poverty, there's like there are the hierarchy of needs is like they're fully there, aren't they, and working their way up, because they might not have their shelter sorted, and they might not have warmth, and, you know, like really, really basic stuff. And so we are really privileged, aren't we, when we're like, we care about mushrooms, because we're not having to think about and spend our time and energy working out how we're going to survive the next day, you know, either literally or socially, because I think for people who live on low incomes, quite a lot of hard work goes into managing social interactions, so that they don't have to, you know, wear on their sleeve that they are struggling financially, and so there'll be a lot of masking, and so actually, Lewis, you know, the hierarchy of needs is a really useful model to think about, because they will be, you know, whatever we think we would put in a kind of outdoor or a nature hierarchy of needs, that's still going to be quite far up, isn't it? For them, when they're still thinking about food and shelter and clothing and warmth.
And recognizing that that's not just meeting, because I think lots of people, because as part of the forest school training, you have to look at some different theories of learning, and lots of people choose the hierarchy to go through and go, oh, in my sessions, we meet food because we do snacks over the fire. We meet shelter because I've got, a tarp roof, or I've got, and it's something about expanding your understanding of that to go like, no, meeting shelter doesn't mean meeting shelter in your session. It means, are they thinking about shelter during your session? Are they thinking about food? They might be having, some popcorn around the fire, but if they're preoccupied with, this is the only bit of food I'm getting, this is, that's a very different experience. But people go, I've done food, I've done shelter, tick to tick to tick,
Have you come across the theory of cognitive bandwidth in anything?
Tell us about that.
I think when organisations are looking at how they might work with what we might call underserved groups, when you're talking about low income and poverty, and it is a theory, and it is still sort of being researched and contested in some places, but there's an idea that actually if you're struggling with a lack of something, that actually it just reduces your cognitive bandwidth and you're not thinking about other stuff, but that as soon as that lack is dealt with, that then you're able to literally perform better on cognitive tasks. And so when we might think of families that we work with, or children that we work with, and we would like them to know what trees are in the woodlands, and as Lewis is saying, they're thinking about food. You've made popcorn, but popcorn isn't a meal, but that's literally all they can think about. And so their cognitive bandwidth is just so narrow that actually trying to get them to learn anything is probably nearly impossible. So, and that's when you go back to that hierarchy of needs again, isn't it? That you need to make sure all those things at the bottom are sorted before you can talk about, tree ID, or not, again, or all of those lovely things that we, like to teach everybody.
Yeah, and that maps so much onto it, doesn't it? That again, that neurodivergent learner isn't going to be able to think about the trees if the tag on their shirt is itching them, or if they're not sure what's coming up. That same idea of bandwidth moves on to those learners 100%. In almost exactly the same way.
Yeah, 100%. So that's your intersectionality right there, isn't it? So if you are thinking about your neurodiverse participants and thinking about your possibly low income participants, some of those things are going to be useful across the board, aren't they?
Yeah. Have you talked about your PhD yet? My computer went weird and I dropped out for a minute. But have you talked about that?
No, not specifically, but it's actually all in discussion anyway. So as part of research, I am quite interested in how and if people on low incomes or living in poverty can experience a sense of adventure, and how they experience the outdoors, because this is the work that we've been doing for a while, in practice. And it's really interesting. So that cognitive bandwidth thing, would be one of the aspects or one of the theories that I've been looking at. But another really interesting idea that I came across more recently, actually, but I think applies really well to what we're talking about, and also, Gemma, what you were talking about with the, the conversations on forest school and the gatekeeping, is this idea that people in poverty or on low income experience this sort of fixity, they call it. And then when you think about through Forest School, what we might be asking people to do. Often it might involve some travel to a different place or a different space. Maybe the clothing and kit that would go with that and would go with that movement to be in a different kind of place or space. And quite often the stigma and the criticism that people who live in poverty can get is directed at the fact that they're quite fixed geographically.
That's interesting.
And that when you think about the stigma applied to, say, children or young people outdoors in certain spaces, say on an estate in a more urban environment, that being outdoors isn't a good thing. It's actually often viewed as being quite antisocial.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you think about what we're trying to do, in lovely natural spaces, and then think about some of the things that could be happening outdoors on an estate, often they're not that different. Some of the activities would be very, very similar, but one set of activities can be viewed as incredibly antisocial.
Yeah.
And
lighting fires.
Playing with knives.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing all day, every day, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I just found this a really, really interesting idea, because lots of the kind of stigma associated with being poor is actually about being very, very fixed and being in your house with a massive telly, because you're always in your house. And that if you're outside of your house, you're actually a problem.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, that's really worth looking at and worth considering when we think about how we might reach underserved, sections of our community, and what their experience of the outdoors is. And that then we want them to come to the woods and do all the things that they have been told they can't do, or if they've been caught doing it, they might have actually got in trouble, seriously, or, just from neighbours or whatever. And they're just actually two different worlds. The experience of the outdoors that, some young people will have, some children will have, is, I think, what's the person called who's raised all these
Intersectional Motherhood is her Instagram handle.
I think she's entirely on the money, really, to raise those issues. I think they do need looking at.
Support the podcast today by becoming a Patreon member at childrenoftheforest.com. Check out the podcast links for more details.
It strikes me as similar to Gemma might remember. I can't remember the chap's name. We reviewed 2 bird books at the same time.
Oh, Simon Barnes.
There we go. And there was a really interesting bit in there that kind of set both of us off, where he's retelling a story, I think, and he's on like a paddle boat or a canoe going down the river. And he basically tees off for about 3 or 4 paragraphs on someone who's walking on the canal path, and they've got their headphones in, and they're walking along, and it just tees off on this person and is like, they're doing it wrong, they're not enjoying nature, what an ignorant person, if only they knew, if only they basically 2 or 3 paragraphs off, if only if they were like me, if only they were enlightened. But it kind of summed up that idea of like, you shouldn't be outside unless you're doing it my way or this way.
I mean, I think attitudes like that, for me, in terms of my research, go really far back, and I won't go into it now, but you look at land, at nature, look at land, and then look at ownership and look at trespassing, and
don't start Gemma off.
No, I won't start Gemma off, hopefully. But when we get to a point where we know that someone is being judgmental about how someone is in a space, in an outdoor space, then I think we are looking at all kinds of much deeper historical,
like class issues and
colonialism, it's
I think recently it struck me thinking about the fact, I can't remember where I read it, but it was something about access to green space, and it was saying that children growing up in what you might consider more urban environments have better access in some ways to green space because it's planned in, because it's there must be one within X number of meters, 500 meters, or we're going to have this many people living here, so we need this much green space in theory. And then saying, by contrast, you can see a lot of greenery in the countryside, but our access to it is significantly lower. It's lots of, you can walk along the edge of this field maybe, or there are certain parts, so it looks like there's greater access, but actually rural children were having less access to green space because
there's no common land.
And
you have to drive to get to the park. There's no rec that's within.
Well, transport is a big thing, isn't it? Transport is and transport inequality is something that I know lots of people the work that I'm doing to do with the FSA, and we're looking at the conference and all these things, and everything now is kind of trying to go, okay, well, it would be lovely to do this kind of rural, you talk about bushcraft festivals or outdoor festivals, and they're always done out in the middle of nowhere because people kind of go, well, we want some privacy, we want some land, we can have fires on, we can got all stuff. But you've immediately taken out anyone that needs to get the bus there, or taken out anyone that doesn't have their own car and the rest of the family need that car, or other stuff like that.
100%. I think transport is a massive one. I'm in Cornwall, and transport links are particularly poor. You where we live, I can't get a bus to the main town, to the closest town, and that's one of the reasons why we go and deliver in communities where people can just walk to it, because otherwise they just won't go. And so when you're talking about barriers, and I know we started with food, but actually transport is massive. And if there's another easy way to get your work out to people, it's to go where they are, not wait for them to come to you, because they just probably won't. And then I think there's an argument to make even for the kind of provision where you might go and collect people on a bus and then take them, because will they be able to access that on their own if they want to, if they think, oh, that was such a great experience, I'd like to recreate that or share that with my family, and then they can't get there. And it's massive. I don't know about where you are, but there's the transport here is like nearly impossible.
Same. It's abysmal. And then when you do see a bus, there'll be like one bus a day and it'll be empty, because it's not a time when people need to use it. It's like,
or it's got to serve, it's such a stretched resource that one bus has got to serve 85 villages. So yes, it does go to the nearest, from where we are, it might go to Exeter or to Taunton, but it takes, they talk about time poverty, and that you might not have 2 hours to spend on a bus while it goes through every little piddly village in the West Country to get you to work or to get you to a session. And that stuff just adds up, doesn't it? So like you say, if you can take this stuff to people, that's gonna.
But then I think if you get to a point where you think, right, it's really important to us that we take what we do to where people are, then you have to kind of let go of some of the control because you can't have it exactly as you need it, and you can't have it in the same way that it would work in your lovely woodland. It's just not possible. And so then you even have to adapt your ethos somewhat. And I think you will have seen on forums that is something that really niggles some people. They get really stressed about, and within forest school particularly, that sort of full fat forest school, or what's the opposite of the full fat? I can't remember.
Semi-skimmed, half, Diet, light, Forest School
Diet,
light.
yeah, Forest School light, that's it. And that might be Mel McCree, I think she might have said that. But I think, you know, if you truly want it to be accessible, then you have to let go of some of the things that you thought were really, really important to you, or to your delivery, or to your content, because otherwise it's not possible. You know, there's only certain things that you can do in a park in comparison to what you might be able to do in a woodland.
Yeah, that's it. We were talking the other day with some trainees about compromises and looking at the Forest School principles and decide, you know, trying to put them kind of in an order and go, well, for you as a practitioner, which are the ones that are like non-negotiable, or which are the ones that you would ideally put like, that is my most important, because, and trying to kind of impart to them that it's all very well going, oh, I've done my level 3 and these are the principles and I'm gonna do for it's like, you will have to make compromises. If you are on a school field, the school might issue you with certain things that you have, the provisos that you have to meet or whatever, or say no, you can't forage, or no, you can't let them eat anything or whatever.
Or you're going to have 30 of them, or
exactly,
you're going to
30 of them and one adult, and the principles are, you know, much higher adult to child ratio, and it's like, well, do you just stomp off and go, I'm not doing it, then they won't let me do the way I want? Or do you go, well, it's better than nothing, and I'm going to go for it anyway and switch things around and to look for the good in it?
Find the value.
Yes. I was reflecting back to what you said a while ago now about children and young people being outdoors in a more urban environment and being kind of judged and for the behavior that they're doing outside. And I was wondering about whether you think that another benefit to going to an environment, bringing all your stuff to the green space near some housing, might also have a benefit of the kind of neighbours in the community seeing those children and young people outdoors playing, and kind of cast them in a fresh light amongst the community. I just wondered whether there might be something in there about using that space, and then whether there is a lasting impact of next time those same kids are in that green space, maybe playing something vaguely similar, or even just playing football or kicking a ball around or whatever, that those people who have seen them doing your project then see them outdoors again and go, oh, do you know what? They are just playing. I just wonder whether there might be.
Do you know, I wish I could just say but that's actually, I have to be really honest, that's not been my experience so far. I think it's a massive sort of culture shift. And then I think I did a piece of writing not long ago where I described you know, doing this kind of work in an urban environment, and the kids were making dens, really standard outdoor activity. And then some of it was left overnight, and then when we came back the next day, the town council had dismantled it and taken it because they just viewed it as littering. And then I just had this massive kind of lightning bolt where I just thought, this is not the same experience for everybody. You know, that play, those instincts, you know, to make a space that's their own and to build a den and make a little mini home or whatever it is that they feel they're doing when they're doing it, it's just a completely different experience for different children, depending on whether they've had the access to a provision like ours where we encourage that and you know, it's supported, or whether they are just following those instincts on their own and then it's just viewed as them littering. And there was one child who had been sort of on the edges of what we'd been doing for the week, and then he went to go back to his den the next day and it wasn't there, and it was just heartbreaking because the progress that we'd made with him was just gone. And I think he just went home. He just was, you know, gutted that this thing that he'd made that he was really proud of wasn't there. And so I think as a result of that, we kind of realized that actually it's not just us turning up and then working with the children, that actually if we're going to do that kind of work, we then also have to have relationships with other bodies.
Yeah.
So now we've been able to talk to the town council and say, for the period of time that we're there, if you find stuff and you think it's junk, it's not, it's part of play. And then at the end, you know, what's left, maybe you have to, you know, look at what they take and what they don't. But yeah, it's just a different set of rules.
So would you say that your work there has kind of been with making relationships with the I don't want to say the authorities in air quotes, but do you see that as a more productive route than the sort of the onlookers that would be reporting stuff to the town council, or have you tried both? Or
parents are usually more on board, but you know, we've got sort of layers of partners, haven't we, really, when we do this work? So you know, we have the partners, the first partners are the parents, and then the next partners might be related to the space that we're in, so the town council or the county council, or you know, the head of the committee for the community hall that we're using for the toilet, and all of those things. And you definitely need to work really, really hard with them, for them to understand what you're doing and to know that it has value. And that can be really, really hard. That can take quite a lot of work in itself. But usually the parents are a bit more, as Gemma described, and they're happy to see their kids involved in something and behaving like kids, basically. And it's not usually, well, so far it's not really been other neighbours reporting that sort of stuff. It is, you know, somebody whose job it is to come and mow the lawn or clean up or whatever. It's almost like they need some training. You know, if that kind of work was going to go on a fairly regular basis, then it would be really great if they could have some training so they could understand what's play and what's not.
I know one of the things, this is a very honest, I'm not going to say it's confession.
Let's have it, Lewis.
I think lots of people will have had this experience, but it's not necessarily something that you broadcast, so I'm going to put it on a recording so that my career can go down the toilet. There's definitely something about being seen in public, and if you were doing full Enid Blyton outdoor, the children have got a red checked picnic basket and they're having a lovely picnic next to a den, as the leader there, if a member of the public was walking past, or some parents were seeing that, I feel like it's like, okay, nobody's going to say anything about this. When you get into, like you're saying, underserved groups or neurodiverse groups, and the play doesn't necessarily look like what people might consider typical play, or for lots of people, they would immediately look at it and go, that's not acceptable. I'm using air quotes here, acceptable play. And as a leader, you know exactly what's going on and you can see the value and everything. But there's that public perception that when you're working with those groups who sometimes need it most, the visuals of it make me as a leader go, oh God, there are times where I go, God, I'm really glad nobody walks through our woods, because I know what's going on is amazing, but this looks, there's a kid there, screaming their head off. And going, I'm going to murder everyone, and I know it's part of a game and they're having a great time and they're playing stuff through, or stuff like that. You must have similar experiences.
No, I definitely have. And there's another estate that we work on regularly, and there are kids there that are doing all the things that we actively encourage in the woods. So they are climbing, they're swinging, but they're climbing a wall, and I feel exactly the same, Lewis. I just think, oh, if someone comes by now, they're just going to think I've got actually no control. And actually what's happening is I'm letting it be, because they need it. They need to climb, and they're swinging on a gate, and it looks like aggro teenagers, but they're just swinging. and so I let it be. But I think I have the confidence to do that now. Earlier on, I probably wouldn't, and I probably would have tried to get the sort of veneer of control. But for everybody else around me, like you're saying, like for the public, not for the people I'm working with. But I'm less stressed about that now. I think I'd happily have an argument with people about what's acceptable and what's play. And
yeah.
You can hold up an award and say, actually, I have been personally vindicated.
Yeah. Oh, it is horrible sometimes. You just think this looks really bad on the outside, but it's really brilliant.
I know. You just want to kind of grab people and kind of like talk at them about play, or like just somehow plant a chip in their brain to go, can you remember that you used to play like this when you were a kid? We all did. And somehow many people have forgotten that. And there's definitely a lot of childism that happens. And it's so fascinating to me because we all did it. But then we all played that way. We all did these things. And then we become grown-ups. And we're like, I noticed when I was teaching in London, like teaching teenagers and living on an estate there and watching people's reactions to the young people using the green space there in between the blocks. Yeah. And it was definitely a thing where little children are running around yelling on the green space, and you just look at people's facial expressions as they walk by. They're like, oh, look at that, and might even talk to them, might even go, oh, are you all right there? You know, having a nice play, or how's your mum, or whatever. And then they get past a certain age, and they're seen as teenagers, and they might actually be doing exactly the same thing, but their tutting comes out, and they're like, and there's just fear. You know, there's just fear of older children playing. And I really do mean playing, like behaviour that if you're prejudiced, you go, oh, they're probably running away because they've nicked a mobile phone. But actually, from what you're looking at, they could just be playing chase. Like there is no evidence to suggest that what they're doing is antisocial. But because they've passed a certain threshold, it's now, as you say, not acceptable for them to be outside. They need to be, and then they also get the criticism, these children, these young people, of, oh, they never go outside. They're on their Xbox all day. They're watching TV all day. They're just on their phone all day, sitting down. Oh, they're not getting any fresh air or exercise. It's like, well, they can't win, can they? Because they go outside.
Yeah, and then when they're outside, they must be dealing drugs.
They're walking along the street, talking to each other, or they're sitting on a wall chatting. Like, and that becomes loitering. That becomes antisocial behaviour. It's like, you know, cut them some slack.
Yeah, they are so misunderstood. Yeah. Another really important thing about misunderstanding teenagers and young people when we're outside is about what they wear, because I think some leaders can get really, really stressed about teenagers maybe not wearing the outdoor clothing that they think they ought to have. And actually,
that's a well-phrased sentence.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, they've got such a lot of, there's so much attached to what they wear and their identity that it's not actually that simple to just say, well, can you wear wellies actually?
Wear a waterproof coat.
Can you get a nice outdoor waterproof coat? It's just not on their radar. And I think that we need to be much, much more forgiving and understanding about that whole clothing and identity, because it's huge, and they can be really misunderstood. And then I've heard leaders say, well, they're just lazy, they won't walk back to their bag and get their coat, and it won't be that. It will be something else, and it will be something attached to their social survival. And
same reason lots of children don't make it to the loo. Little children don't make it to the loo because they're so engrossed. And the same way that you go, oh, they just don't know, or they don't do whatever. I was going to say, when I was, I think 15, I had a period of time where I wore corduroy purple flares that had a 32-inch like flare on each leg, and massively oversized. I reckon I weighed 1.5 stones, and I wore like XXL AC/DC shirts and purple cord flares. It was a strong look. I was just thinking when you said about clothes and there's so much attached to them, and I'm like, yeah, it was inappropriate in every single scenario.
Yeah. And then when we're talking about kids from low income families, that identity is even stronger. And so they can get quite a lot of grief from people talking about, their sports brand clothing or whatever, and how much it must cost. Like, well, if they've got no money, then how comes they've got this pair of trainers that must cost that? But actually, there's research to say that parents will just stretch everything and not pay for other stuff in order to make sure that their kids can at least survive socially within their peer group. And that is so important and so powerful for them, that then when we're trying to get them out into the woods and the mud and the rain and everything, it's so helpful to just remember what else they've got going on. And then, I mean, like you, Lewis, and your purple flares, and I mean, it's everything, isn't it? But how do people forget? Like Jem was saying, like, how do they forget that they were young once and that was everything? That was all you cared about. And then we want them to put waterproofs on.
Yeah. And we just recently looked into and have ordered like iron-on patches for with our logo on. Nice. And actually, what was interesting was some of the more affluent children who immediately went, I could put that over this logo. I could put it over this thing. Just as I mean, I know you know about it as an idea, but for people listening, that idea that you can have these patches or stickers or badges, and you can put them then on whatever clothing you've got, and it's a lot harder for people to go, that's a £60 coat, and that's a what are they, the little middle aisle coat,
waterproofs. And also because they grow really quickly. And we were doing hoodies, like everybody, and then families would buy hoodies, and then the kids would just grow really fast, and then they wouldn't be able to wear them anymore, and they'd just spent 20 or 25 quid on a hoodie that didn't even get through a year. And so we've got the same. We have badges, and if they want them, because I think often they do want to have they do want to feel like a group, and they do want to feel like a sense of belonging in that way. So, the logoed stuff can be really, really helpful, but it can also be incredibly exclusive. And I just sort of got to a point where I don't want to see, some of our children with hoodies and some not, and then know that some haven't because they can't afford it. And I know they can't. And so why am I even providing it as an option?
It's back to that stigma thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Why would you do that? Yeah. Why would you do that? And so we just stopped doing it. But interestingly, lots of children still ask for hoodies. So, and we just said, oh no, we don't do that anymore. We just have badges, and then you can sew it on what you want. And then when you grow out of it, you can take it off and sew it on something else. You can sew it on your pants if you want. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, hoodies have become a big like primary school leaving thing, I think, haven't they? I see loads of kids wandering around this time of year with school leavers hoodies. I'm a big.
But have you guys been involved in the conversation where there was a while where because they normally have like the number on the back, don't they? The year, which is a confusing thing to try and work out what year did you leave primary school and what age and all this stuff. But it was similar to, so when I was at primary school, lots of the children had those Alice bands, because I grew up in the 90s. I was a child of the 90s. So it was those Alice bands with like gel, and it would have the name in like, and then it didn't take long before people were like, that's a massive safeguarding risk. You've literally put that. So as you can walk out the gate, you can go, Sophie, and it's Sophie because it says so on literally on their forehead. And but then they did the same thing, basically happened with hoodies. They had a few years where they'd get like James or Michelle on the back, and then people went, this is a safeguarding nightmare. So they said that the kids could only put, when I was teaching the year sixes, they could only put nicknames on, and not every kid had a nickname. So you'd get the kids to write down, look, could you put a nickname on here that people call you? But it can't be Jonesy or, it had to be nothing to do with your name. So you get these kids and you go, no one's ever called you like Picklehead, right? That's not kids just like that. Finally, that chance to make up your own nickname. I'm gonna be like Sassy Queen. Yes, people will think that's my nickname. Like,
yeah. I was going to say that whole thing with hoodies and very specific clothing is really attached to this idea of poverty proofing. Have you come across that stuff?
yes, but please talk more.
Yeah, so really poverty proofing is a term that is kind of borrowed from education. So it very much applies to what you're saying, Lewis, and to schools. So, for example, the special jumper day, and then, you know, like Christmas jumper, or the leaving hoodies, or kids on sports teams where they have a special sport kit or whatever. And that actually the idea of poverty proofing the school day was you know, fancy dress where parents feel they've got to go and buy something, or a Christmas jumper day where they haven't got a Christmas jumper, but all of a sudden they've got to go and get a Christmas jumper because otherwise their kid's going to stand out. And then actually quite a lot of those kids that are in that situation, either their parents are using money that they can't really afford to go and get a ridiculous Christmas jumper that's only good at Christmas, or the kids just don't go to school that day. They just don't turn up because they can't afford it. And so one of the things that we can do as outdoor providers is that we can look at some of the useful kind of ideas that come from poverty proofing a general school day, and look at how we can apply that to ourselves. So it can be really challenging when we're outdoors, can't it? Because we need kids to have certain kit in horrible weather. But depending on who you're working with, you definitely would have to look at having kit that you can just give everybody, or that, you know, they turn up and then they can have it when they're there, or that you can support families in some way by having a set of kit for everybody. It's looking at ways that we might be accidentally excluding some children if we require them to have certain things. And not all schools are great at it, but also definitely not all outdoor providers are great at it. Some can get quite stressed, can't they, when people turn up in the wrong stuff. And I think you just have to be as cool as you can be about that, as long as they're not unsafe and they're not going to become a first aid problem. You know, I think you kind of have to let some of that stuff go if it means that they're there. It's a bit like what Gemma was saying earlier, you know, like, where's the value here? Is the value in that they're here, or is it that they're here and they're wearing the stuff I think they should be wearing?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's people should go and find your blog if they haven't already, but I remember that having a massive impact on me. The blog talking about that idea that it was almost the other side of that coin, where people go, oh, I just get them out in whatever they're wearing and they go in the mud, whatever, not considering that that means that parent has to go to the laundrette, or parent has to then give up on a shift at work. And that for me had a massive impact. And there's a conversation I've had with students and people that have come to us for training since, where they've been so gung-ho about, you know, oh, I just get them out and then they just, you know, they learn to send them in next time, or they won't do it again. And telling
it like a kind of like a horror story of like, oh my god, I had this girl turn up in this like this outfit or that outfit, and you know, and it's like, well, maybe there was a reason for that. And as I was saying, you know, I just got them muddy from head to toe anyway. Oh, I can't understand why these parents are so anti-mud. And your article, similar to what Liz is saying, it seemed like at the time that was the only voice I had heard in that kind of echo chamber of all the forums and stuff that we're on, that was saying, hang on a minute, think about it from this other angle in terms of whether or not there is another coat at home that child can wear to school tomorrow after you've allowed it to get caked in mud, all those things, you know.
I think when kids turn up sometimes in things that look wildly inappropriate for the outdoors, like a pink fluffy whatever,
30-inch
sometimes
flares.
I think that's masking. I think that's poverty masking on the part of the parents. So particularly in schools where children are told that they come in something that's not their school uniform, I think there's a panic for some parents, and they might even specifically go off and get something that they think is going to be acceptable non-school uniform. And actually it doesn't really work very well for the outdoors because it's like pink unicorn leggings or something. But often that is done to mask the fact that they might not have as much as they wish.
How's this for a crossover then, Nick? I once did I did a birthday party where I wasn't aware of this, but the family who'd organized the birthday party had told everybody to come in fancy dress as characters. So they'd come specifically to a Forest birthday party in the most wild, some people had gone all out, they're going to win a fancy dress party. Some people have done those, those onesie suits now that you get, you look like Buzz Lightyear, you just put it on.
Yeah.
I think there was a period where Primark did a roaring trade, and every time there was fancy dress, it was like, cool, I'm coming in my bear onesie, cool, I'm coming in this onesie. And that was like a really good leveler. But suddenly doing a birthday party, I was like, okay, I'll plan this and I've planned this, and all these kids turned up. One kid turned up as Danger Mouse. He was white from head to toe. And I didn't, and his parents weren't there, and I didn't know whether I could go, sure, you can climb a tree in that, you can go digging, or, he could have done a Purcell advert at the end of it. It's ridiculous.
Oh, that's amazing.
We had a kid, a little 3-year-old, was he 3 or 2, turn up to a toddler session the other day, dressed as Tinkerbell from the waist down and Peter Pan from the waist up, and wearing like a pink tutu, basically, as Tinkerbell. And then he was watching me light the fire and the ferro rod, and he was like, in his own language, I want to do that. I really want to do that. I was like, sure, you could light this cotton wool. And I looked at him and I was like, oh my God, you're like a potential human fireball. I've got to do something about this. So I sort of said to Dad, I'm not really confident about him like leaning his pink tutu into some flaming cotton wool. So Dad like hastily kind of did some rearranging and made it safe. But I thought, wow, this is as you say,
dynamic risk assessment.
Dynamic assessment, potential first aid issue.
Oh, amazing. So Nick, we've taken up a lot of your time already, but is there anything that we haven't asked you that you really want to tell people about your work, or that people should really be incorporating into their practice?
If anyone's really interested, there's a short list of things on my website, and there's a drop down menu that says poverty proofing the outdoors, and it's just the most kind of easily changeable things that we could all do. But one thing that I think is quite important, and it is not easy to achieve, but is thinking about role models, because and role models in the outdoors, because it's really hard to find role models who come from poverty or low income. And like our favourite role model for that at the moment generally is obviously like Marcus Rashford. And then we can all have fantastic role models for various things in the outdoors, but not usually for poverty. And so I think where possible, when you are thinking about your volunteers or your staff or your youth leaders or whatever, I think if you can find people who are, have that lived experience, that is so important and so valuable for the groups that you work with. And it might be that it's quite hard to identify that in terms of staff. But definitely one of the things we would do is have lots of lovely youth leaders who come from diverse backgrounds, so that, there are different opportunities to relating to each other, and that you have the opportunity to see somebody who you think is like you. And we could make those same arguments for all kinds of things, couldn't we? I mean, we could make those arguments for race and for gender and sexuality. and disability. But I think the same goes for income as well, actually.
That's so interesting, because it's a thing you said it's not easy to achieve, and it seems it's something that's not immediately thought of in that list that you've just given of, like, diversity in the outdoors, and it's so difficult to kind of talk about. It's almost more there's such a lot of like shame attached to it that throughout this whole conversation I haven't mentioned my own upbringing, which was in quite serious poverty. But I haven't mentioned it because
you should have mentioned it, Gemma.
But
we could have bonded.
But that's the kind of weird thing. It's almost like, well, it's a kind of thing of like, I'm not ashamed of my childhood, but I don't want to like brag about it. I don't want to go, oh well, that whole thing of like, well, back in my day I was down mine at 6 a.m. and all. You don't want to be that person of going, and it's not, and there's not often an opportunity to bring it up in the same way that there might be with something that's maybe more visible, or something that comes up in terms of ability or the news. Do you know what I mean? Like, we've had conversations with young people about sexuality in the woods. We've had, and race and gender all the time. But poverty, I don't think, has ever come up, because nobody goes, hey, I couldn't afford my lunch today. Nobody says it. It's so hidden. And so
it is designed that way, though. So it's not an accident that that's how you feel, because it is designed that way. And when you think about all the poverty propaganda, in mainstream media or on TV, it's not good, is it? People who are living in poverty, it's a bit like the kids in the street. They're seen as not doing good things, and it's the same when we look at poverty generally. So that's not an accident at all. And actually, I fight against that now, because I think it is so important to say. It's so important. It's like coming out of the poverty closet. I think it is like absolutely crucial. Otherwise, we just continue to feel embarrassed and ashamed, because there is so much stigma attached to it. And it's not a protected characteristic in law, even though actually it causes people a lot of problems in terms of equality and access to all kinds of things, and it needs to be a protected characteristic, for all the reasons that we've been talking about already. I'm so glad you said that, Gemma. You've just come out of the poverty closet. Don't edit it out.
I won't. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like free school meals is the kind of closest you get to a protected term there, isn't it? Which lasts when you're at school, and then, but even that is kind of hidden and shameful. It was when I was at school anyway. It was like,
it is.
Pupil Premium follows you, though. Pupil Premium follows, and Pupil Premium Plus, doesn't it? I know when I was working as a teacher, there were different, so the monitoring was different there was Pupil Premium, there was free school meal, and then there was also anybody who ever dipped into free school meals. So if someone was on free school meals when they were 6, but they hadn't been, and they were 11 now, they were still in a certain group to go, okay, that person is probably not far off it at any point. Do you know what I mean?
It's almost like that's not, and you can't self-identify. So, like at secondary school, when I wasn't on free school meals anymore, but my family couldn't afford to do any of the extracurricular activities at all. And that was just a like given. So you didn't even really talk about it. And then, but if you had a kind of self-identifying, not label, but like group that you belonged to, then you could go, I'm sorry to ask, but can I have access to this because I'm part of this group? You could identify with a group and go, or the school kind of go, there's this provision, whereas that provision was never advertised. It was just like, oh, if they happened to mention that actually you could pay in installments, or you could get a grant, or you could get a bursary, or the school would pay a bit. It just wasn't ever even spoken about.
I think there are ways to bring it up in your sessions. So one of the things we do is we might make, so there's this soup that is in the Jack Munro book that it's called Tinestrone, and it's designed for people who might have got food from food banks. And then we've made that, the kids have made it themselves because it's also really easy to make. And then it just opens up those conversations about the fact that some people don't have enough food and that they go to a food bank and that this is maybe what they get. And it's been really interesting because we will have children who will say, well, why are we eating this? I never have food from tins. But then you get to talk to them about it. So I think it's important to find ways to work it in the same way that we might for other things.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be embarrassed about it, and we shouldn't be ashamed of it. I think it's really, really important, and it will help everybody that we're working with to be able to empathise and understand. Because sometimes it becomes really glaringly obvious that some children have never considered the idea that some children don't have enough food. Mm-hmm. And they need to know that. They need to know that that is a feature of life for lots of people.
Yeah. Right. I'm definitely going to do that. Find ways of bringing it up, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's times where we're storytelling, and that comes up a lot in like a lot of old fashioned stories, or a lot of any kind of story actually involves like a family or a child in some kind of hardship.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I'm telling those stories, I'm aware that some of the children listening, it's going to be more poignant than for other children. But I think that's about the only kind of time that it's
I think that's also really great, and that's a really good way in, and we do quite a lot of that. So we might do stone soup.
Yeah.
Or we might do the magic porridge pot, and there are an awful lot of fairy tales that we can work in to the storytelling or to the food and storytelling that actually are stories of famine that are incredibly relevant. And so that's an easy way in that is less obvious. But, you know, you could see how you could use a famine fairy tale in that way. And then maybe the following week you follow it up with a recipe from Jack Munro and the Bootstrap Cook, you know, tinned food recipes or whatever.
Nick, I know I said we were close to time. It just occurred to me that I would really like to ask you. So we're talking about poverty proofing sessions and things. And you've talked about sessions that you run. I'm taking from the way you've talked about it, it's mostly just you and the children or the learners there. Do you find that and we were talking about things like reducing the stigma of just like having the food there, second breakfast is always cooked, or the kit is just on the side, if anybody wants to take it, go for gold. Do you find that you have to do anything different if you have parents at the session with you? Well, as you were talking then about stones to soup and about porridge and things like that, and I was remembering times where I've seen parents do that social thing of going, no, we don't take more than that. No, we don't have a second. No, we don't, because that stigma is still there of like, will it be my child that goes up and has 5 bowls? Will it be my child that goes and
I think that's really interesting, and I think there are definitely different ways that families will deal with those kinds of social situations. And there's a really amazing book that I read that is about middle classes in school, and it essentially describes that during this research she found that middle class parents saw teachers and adults and schools and other provision as a resource for their child, and they taught their children that it was a resource there for them to use. And so that definitely meant that the children from middle class families were asking for more time and attention because they had just kind of grown up thinking that
it's there for me.
Those things were there for them. Whereas on the other side, parents who were income were teaching their children more to be independent and to not ask. And that just reminds me of what you just said then. And I think it would probably be those parents who would say, no, you've had some, you don't need seconds, because they would be really, really self-conscious about that.
And possibly that fear of like, you know, am I going to be asked to, not necessarily, am I going to be asked to pay for more for this later, but, you know, that thing of like, oh, is there a quid pro quo here? Is there an imbalance here? You know, and
not knowing how it works and being fearful of maybe not understanding the small print. Is that what you mean? So that they might be worried that their child would take more and that there'll be something that means they have to pay more, or
Well,
oh, thank you so much. What a great
thank you. It's so much to think about and to digest and
thank you for
take away.
Thanks, guys. You're so great. I love what you do.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.